Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning into the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to another episode of APM Success. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Altelisha Taylor and Dr. Brittne Halford. They are family med and internal med physicians, respectively. They are also co-founders of Wealth-Minded MD, which is a podcast as well as a physician coaching program focused on helping doctors make empowered financial decisions. Dr. Taylor, Dr. Halford, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
For starters, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background as well as what made you want to start Wealth-Minded MD?
Good question. I have been interested in finance for quite some time. I actually considered a career on Wall Street when I was an undergrad. I went to Duke for undergrad and always, had this interest in business and finance. A lot of people in my family did business and finance, and I really was undecided if I was going to follow their path or start my own pathway through medicine. And I actually worked in finance for a little bit and ended up, considering that pathway for quite some time and ended up going to medical school, mainly because I realized that although I wanted to make money and build wealth one day, I didn't want my primary purpose in life to be how I could make some already large corporation even more money. I wanted to have an impact sort of on a daily basis, if you will. And so I ended up going to medical school and becoming a physician. But while I was doing that, I constantly encountered doctors who didn't know a lot about finance. And I thought to myself, wow, this seems really odd that a lot of doctors have, a great deal of student loan debt. They go through their training program where they're not making as much money and then hit this period of life where they're making more money than the average American, substantially more, and really don't understand how to manage it or build wealth or make empowered decisions, as you mentioned. And so I really wanted to do something about that, started a blog, realized that I like to talk a lot. And so ended up being invited on several podcasts, from White Coat Investor to Money Meets Medicine. And then I met this lovely person who reached out to me in the DMs and was like, hey, what do you think about starting something together? And, from our initial conversations, it became apparent that we had a similar goal and a similar vision for what we wanted to do in this space. In full transparency, her and I are African-American physicians, and there's not that many of us in this, finance space. One of the things that we also noticed was that a lot of the financial podcasts, a lot of the TV shows, a lot of the information was, just to be fully transparent, boring. And so we wanted to create something that we thought was engaging and entertaining while also being transparent about our own struggles and our own pathway, and giving doctors who listen some inspiration that they could use to move forward and progress in their own lives. And so that's how Wealth-Minded MD was born. We've been at this podcast thing for well over a year. I think we're knocking on a year and a half, Brittne, if I'm, thinking about things correctly. And it just really blossomed from there. And so, we've got a podcast now. We also help doctors learn how to negotiate. And so that's been really fun. One of the other things that we've done is really inspire other physicians to start their own businesses. And so, we are going at this thing and really excited about all that we've done and all that we have on the docket this year.
How about you, Dr. Halford?
Yeah, unlike Altelisha, I was not birthed into finance. I actually grew up in Flint, Michigan, and am the first doctor and one of the only physicians in my family. And so with that, I knew growing up in this single parent household with no legacy of wealth that I was on my own to carry the burden of financing my education. So when all said and done, I paid off $138,000 in under 3 years, 2 years and 9 months to be exact. But with that burden came a lot of responsibility. I wanted to be a good steward because I knew that I would have to likely help other members in my family, and that I wanted to be able to grow my wealth, to create a legacy and change the narrative that I grew up in, that culture in which I grew up in. So I started to learn more and just share on social media, became a financial coach for women in healthcare, because women carry a different financial burden than men. And women often feel guilty about asking for more money and, really negotiating what they deserve. So with that, Leisha and I teamed up, and in our podcast, not only do we make it fun, but we also make it safe. We create the psychological safety where we share our own mistakes because no one is perfect, and that's how you learn. And we allow women, we give them permission. It's almost like they don't need it, but we say it to spend their money on fun, to spend their money on pleasure, and to make mistakes. So I'm really excited about what comes for us in the future and the lives that we've already impacted and the lives that we'll impact in the future.
So many good things here I'm excited to dive into. Uh, I'm curious, just sort of as an aside, Dr. Taylor, you mentioned you've got some background in the financial world. How do you feel like that shaped what you now observe in the finance industry? Do you have basically a similar perspective to many of your, we'll call them uninitiated peers in medicine? Or do you find that you hold a lot of the same views?
Oh my goodness, this is a loaded question. You're basically saying, like, what do I think about, people in finance? And Justin, one thing you're going to learn real quick is I have very strong opinions. Okay. So in terms of my, take on things, I will say that, I tend to want people to be empowered to be able to build wealth and invest on their own. And so I am not as much of a fan of financial advisors. I don't think that every financial advisor is bad. And I certainly don't think that there's anything wrong with paying for good help. My issue is that I think that sometimes people are overcharged for subpar advice. And I think that once someone knows enough to be able to thoroughly vet a financial advisor, they probably know enough to be able to do it on their own. And so one of my missions in life is not necessarily to become a financial advisor and manage someone's assets for them, but to empower them to be able to manage it on their own. And I think that that may not be the same philosophy of a lot of people that work in finance. I think that people who tend to work in finance, from my own personal experience, want to manage everything for somebody, right? Or they are managing billions of dollars in assets for large corporations, which is just very different from, the everyday expenses that people have. So, I think there's a big difference between institutional finance and personal finance. And I want doctors to know how to invest on their own and know how to build wealth on their own. And I think, knowing 20% of the information can get you, 80% of the way there. And I think that oftentimes we as doctors feel the need to be perfect, and we are apprehensive because we don't know everything. And so we are scared to even get started with the knowledge we do have. And so part of this is giving people the financial confidence to get started and saying, okay, I realize you're not where you want to be, and you are a little apprehensive, and I think that's okay. And we've all started there. Nobody is just good at something overnight. It took us years and years to learn medicine, and now a lot of us feel very confident as we practice medicine. And if you can learn medicine, you can learn money. And so, just really giving people that confidence that they can do it on their own, instead of people being reliant on somebody else. Now, if you know it on your own and you choose to outsource that, I think that's your prerogative. But at least maybe we can get you, to the point where you can thoroughly vet the person that you've hired.
Dr. Halford, have you had any formative experiences, either in life with money in general or with financial advisors, that have shaped your views on this topic?
Oh my. Justin, so recently I had a conversation with a financial advisor. And unlike Leisha, I think that they have a role, let me say, not unlike Leisha. Leisha wants people to
I
be
feel
confident and
validated
have,
right now.
and have and wants people to feel confident in the management of their finances. And I do too. And so I think that they do have a role, because one of the things that we have is we have money as physicians, but one of the things that we don't have, that is a even hotter commodity, I think, is time. And so why not use someone to help you to manage both? And I have one financial advisor who helps us with our cash balance plan. It's a little bit more complicated. There's an actuary involved, there's our CPA involved. So I don't have to get in the mix really to understand and communicate with all of these people. And In some regards, they have been great with the communication piece, but in other regards, I have been a bit concerned about their investment strategy. And with that, I wholeheartedly agree with Leisha that we want you to at least have enough understanding. So when you're engaging with various professionals that are a part of your financial community, you can ensure that their management aligns with your values. So in this case, this financial advisor for a cash balance plan was investing in some options. And I'm like, okay, we want a 3 to 5% return with this cash balance plan. Why do we need to invest in options? It sounds like you're trying to time the market instead of just allowing us to have the growth with low expenses. So with that conversation, I was actually able to query their strategy. And if they did not have a good enough, satisfying answer to say, okay, how about we take a better direction that aligns with our values and ensure that we're still meeting those goals, still gives them some authority and autonomy, but also is in alignment with what we desire.
One of the challenges of our industry is that we don't have something like board certification where you can say, well, they might not be, the sharpest tool in the shed, but at least they went to med school for 4 years, did 3 years in residency, and had to study really hard to pass a really hard test. And there's a natural weeding out process that happens.
Yes.
In financial planning, wealth management. All you really need to do is say, hey, I'm a financial advisor. There's a really funny episode last week tonight, John Oliver, the late night guy who did a thing where it's like all about the expose about financial advisors. And at the end, he's like, and anybody watching this, you just graduated from the John Oliver School of Financial Advisors. So print out this certificate, hang it on your wall, and call yourself a wealth manager. And that's the kind of quality control that we have, unfortunately. And Dr. Taylor, as you mentioned, there are, questions you can ask to be able to vet. And, there's a couple quick tests, actually, like baseline education and fee structure and qualifications around who you've served historically that are pretty quickly do weed out a lot of the bad actors. And there's actually regulatory disclosures that you can search on Broker Check, which is FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority, a national regulation body in America, is one way where you can go on there and like Google your advisor and say, have they been censured by FINRA in the past and sued by clients and had to pay back money? So there are those tests, but unfortunately, many people, and this isn't just doctors, this is anyone, they don't apply these tests of, is this person a CFP? Is this person fee only? Do they have, a history of disclosing conflicts of interest rather than just sweeping them under the rug? The questions they ask are, or the lens that they use is like, I trust this person because he's my brother-in-law, or my friend uses this person and therefore I should be able to use them too. And that turns out is a terrible way to discern if someone is really a bona fide advisor. So
Okay, let me respond to this. So I think that there's three kinds of doctors, right? There are doctors like myself who feel very confident doing it themselves, right? I probably wouldn't hire a financial advisor. And if I did, I would hire them for one specific purpose, maybe to manage a cash balance plan like Brittne was talking about, maybe because I have a specific question on a specific issue. But then I think there are a chunk of people in the center who maybe do know more than what they think and just need someone to check their work, right? Maybe they just need someone to set a plan that they can follow. And then I think that the third group of doctors are the people who really have no interest in learning this and really want to outsource it all. My goal is not necessarily to make everybody a do-it-yourself investor, but I do think that everybody should have a baseline level of financial knowledge to, as I mentioned, at the very least, be able to thoroughly vet the person that they've hired, and to evaluate him or her periodically, right? So the vetting process shouldn't just be a one-time, do I hire you or not, but it should be an ongoing, right? Are you continuing to, meet the moment? Are you continuing to allow my portfolio to grow at a sufficient pace? And let me compare it to these other benchmarks to really get an idea of how well you're doing or maybe how well you're not doing and go from there. So I have strong opinions about financial advisors. I do think that a lot of doctors tend to get taken advantage of, which obviously I'm not a huge fan of. And so anything that I can do, that Brittne and I can do, or anybody that's really interested in finance that's in this space can do to empower more physicians, to at least learn more about personal finance, I am for and I support.
You mentioned contract negotiation earlier, and I understand that this is a there's a lot that could go into this, both like technically and strategically, and it varies by specialty in terms of the dynamics of the practice you're talking to. But tell us a little bit, Dr. Taylor, about what you have observed and how you have sort of developed conviction about how you help physicians um, be self advocates in that negotiation process.
Yeah, it's really funny. I remember sitting in a lecture, maybe it was didactics or something, when I was a resident, and we had a session on negotiation or like jobs, post training or something along those lines. And I remember asking one of my attendings about, I think it was a cost of living adjustment, because I, come from the finance world and that is not uncommon. And I remember her answer was baffling to me because first she laughed and then she said, doctors don't get cost of living adjustments. And I remember thinking to myself, well, why? Things get more expensive over time because of inflation. So if your salary is not going up, if the pay that you receive is not increasing from year to year, then you're effectively losing money, right? You're losing purchasing power. And it seemed odd to me that that was just, at least in that case, seemed to be the accepted norm. And that wasn't, how I was sort of taught coming from a different background. And it was from that point on that I realized, oh man, maybe I have a different set of skills and a different mindset on this issue that other doctors could benefit from. And, when we look at the statistics and you look at the research studies, it shows that a lot of employers, I think it's over 70% of employers, expect the people that they are hiring to negotiate their salary, but less than a third of people do. And so if somebody is expecting you, right, to negotiate a higher number and you're not doing that, you're effectively leaving money on the table. And I meet a lot of doctors who are burned out, overworked, feel underpaid, really want to cut down in medicine, and they feel like they cannot do that. They feel stuck in their jobs. And a lot of that hinges back to money. They feel like they don't have enough money. And, my main thing is, okay, what can we do about that? Can we help you learn how to negotiate, help you learn to advocate for yourself so that you can increase your pay or buy back your time or start really crafting the life that you always envisioned? And so I really think that learning how to negotiate, whether it's a contract, whether it is a business deal or whatever, is really helpful in a lot of facets of our lives. And so helping doctors learn how to do that is something that, Brittne and I are both really passionate about.
Dr. Halford, what have you observed in this area? And I'm curious if you've seen distinctions perhaps between men and women.
Yes. Yes, we've seen a lot of distinctions between men and women. We know that only 30% of women tend to negotiate compared to 46% of men. So, Leisha mentioned the statistics of how many people actually negotiate in general, and that is a lot less for women. We know that women, they feel almost indebted. Oh, we should express gratitude towards even having a job and considering me for this option. We know that women often don't advocate for themselves in the same way that men do. And this is imperative that we do so as anyone who identifies as female or gender, because there's a wage gap that still exists. And this wage gap actually exists between physicians. There's a study in 2021, I believe, that showed that over a 40-year career, women earn $2 million less. Okay. And that is significant. That is significant not only because of the amount of money, but also that money has other types of value. It has a time value, it has an energy value. And we know that women often carry a large load of the family. So this negotiation that Leisha is talking about is not only a negotiation for money, it could also be a negotiation for time. This is something that I did after my first year. So I negotiated a sign-on bonus when I first started my current job. And then after the first year, I was exhausted. I was a mother who had like a 1-year-old baby. My husband was a psychiatry fellow, and I was traveling to all these various sites that were affiliated with our hospital, and I was tired. And so what I negotiated was more administrative time to do work like teaching that I love, but could be on my own schedule and also not be as burdensome for our family dynamics. And then I also negotiated location. So I was not driving an hour away to work for 7 days on. Instead, I negotiated a certain number of locations that I actually liked the work that I did at that specific location. So when we are empowering you to negotiate, yes, we want you to ask for the money because the money matters, but we also want you to see the negotiation as a full package to afford not only money, but also time wealth, also energy wealth, and the other aspects of wealth.
That's a great point. And I frequently will talk to clients of mine, and I'm sure you interact with these docs who are like, they see the number, whatever that compensation number is, and they get fixated on that and they want to push it as far northward as possible, understandably. But compensation is a lot more than that. And actually, many times more important is what is the future flexibility of a potential role? What is the culture like in an organization that may or may not provide that flexibility? And in the process of negotiation, I will often encourage physicians to like ask questions about, do you see potentially being able to go 0.8 after 2 years? Or even just if you're nervous to ask that because you're like, oh, I'm going to be the guy who or gal who doesn't want to work that hard, just look around and ask, how many people here are less than 1.0 FTE? And if that number is 0, then that says something culturally about the place you're moving into. Not that you need to not work there, but just there may not be a pathway for you to work less. And if that's important to you, then you want to throw a couple more names in the hat in terms of places you're looking.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. When I am talking to the residents at my institution or other physician groups, one of the things that, I was always taught and that I mentioned to them is there's usually location, money, and time or schedule. And usually most doctors can get 2 out of those 3. And so you've got to figure out what's most important to you. Is it important to you to be in the location that you want? Is it important to you to have the schedule you want? Or is it important to you to have the money you want? And usually 2 out of those 3 you can get pretty easily from my experience, but it's that third thing you really are going to have to negotiate. And as you mentioned, Justin, I think that there's 2 other intangibles that can make or break a job, and that's people and support. Do you like the people that you are working with? And do you feel like you have the support that you need to do your job well? When you look at people who switch jobs, a large portion of them who regret the switch do so because they don't like the people that they are now working with, or they miss the people that they used to work with, or they don't feel like they have the support that they need to do their job well, or they feel like they had that support at their previous location. And so just really thinking about what is it that I really want out of a job? What are the factors that are most important to me? And it's okay if money is one of your top 2, that's totally fine. But it's like, okay, now we need to work on how we're going to get you that third thing, and really think about different options. One of the things that I'm always talking to my residents about, that me and Brittne are coaching physicians on, is sometimes it might actually be great to negotiate things as a package deal. And before you do that, really getting an understanding of what's important to your employer and what's important to you. Brittne kind of talked about the way that she negotiated things at her job. For me and my job, I am family medicine, but I'm also a sports medicine specialist. And so I kind of flirt the line of primary care some days and subspecialist other days. And for me, it was like, okay, I know the amount of money that I would like to get paid. But if I decide to work for an academic institution, maybe they can't pay me market rate. So let me see what other things are important. And for my employer, it was, we really want somebody that can do both of those roles. And for me, it's like, okay, if you can't pay me what I want, then how about I cut down on my clinical time? And so for us, that was a good switch. I like to do other things like podcasts and talk to doctors about money. And so that sort of flexibility really helped me out. But I never would have known that that was an option had I not really gotten an understanding of what my employer wanted, what was really important for her, and then what was important for me, and really sat down and outlined my priorities. And so I think just really helping doctors to realize, what both of you you all said, Brittne, that it's not just money, that it's also time and schedule and flexibility and some of those other intangible factors that can make or break a job. And, again, empowering physicians to really advocate for those things and saying it is okay to want money. Money is important, right? It's not the only important thing, but it is important. And there's nothing wrong with you wanting to get paid your value and making sure that the compensation you receive adequately reflects the value that you bring.
And I would just add one other thing. I think sometimes people approach negotiation as a one-time event, right? I'm going to sign this contract when I'm starting the new job, and so I will negotiate then. Negotiation can occur at any point in your career. And so as Alicia's talking about, understanding what is important to your organization and understanding the value that you're bringing and being able to articulate that value. That's one of the differences that is also seen with women and men in medicine is that there's been some literature that says women do more non-promotable activities, like we might sign up for wellness or a burnout or whatever, team collaboration. But those things actually have value because if someone feels more supported at that institution, as you all are mentioning, they're more likely to stay with that institution. And so decreasing turnover has significant value. So what we're just saying is that don't see negotiation as a one-time event. Understand that your career is going to evolve. Your participation in what you're going to do with the organization will evolve. And once you see that you are doing something that adds significant value, then you should be compensated appropriately and proportionately to the work that you're doing. So ensure that you're documenting it and see the activities, not just, oh, okay, this is just part of my role. Yes, and you could still be compensated for it. So be able to articulate that and ask for what you desire.
Anybody watching our YouTube channel will see me nodding emphatically at Dr. Halford's thoughts here, particularly documenting ways that you add value. It's one thing to say, hey, I need a 10% raise because, hey, cost of living, inflation's expensive. That's kind of like an entitled sort of approach. If you're like, I think I deserve a raise because here's 7 ways that I've saved this group or this hospital or whatever meaningful amounts of time, money, valuable resources in the last 12 months. That is a totally different ask. And it's sort of the same economic trade, but it's framed totally differently. And it's going to be much more palatable to your superiors who, by the way, may just have to justify your raise to somebody further up the ladder. And if they can just pass along, well, here's the 7 reasons that we need to keep this doc happy, you're making everybody look good and making that an easier dialogue. I'm curious if either of you have had experiences or resources that you've referenced in terms of either technical aspects of negotiation or like mindset, because it can be nerve-wracking. There's probably listeners right now who are thinking, man, I'd love to man up or woman up and talk to my boss about earning more, but that just feels like climbing Mount Everest. I don't have the mindset, the belief in myself and my own value to be able to have that conversation. How would you get somebody from fear and trepidation to I'm ready to write that email and I'm ready to send it?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Brittne and I have our Negotiate Like a Boss accelerator where we kind of take people through that. We have a specific framework. It's called our SWAP Squared framework, and we kind of take people through that. And one of the things that we've gotten really good feedback from the program, and one of the things that people say that is the most helpful is the templates and the scripts. Yeah, I've done this a good amount of times in my career, and so sometimes I think for a lot of people it's okay, this is what I want to say, but I don't know how to say that in a way that is well received. And so, teaching people, okay, let's think about the potential, pushback that you may get. And so when they say this, maybe you could frame it like that. When they say this, you frame it like that. We also do role plays where, they are advocating for themselves in front of us, right? And then they get to practice. And oftentimes it's nerve-wracking for them, but they find that once they've practiced it once and heard themselves and seen themselves play back and were able to get some feedback and saying, okay, this is something that you did well. This is something else that you could do better. And so I think a lot of this is practice. It is a skill that you are, may not be naturally good at. A lot of people are not necessarily naturally born to be good negotiators. And so practicing that skill, one of the things that I tell doctors is you don't necessarily get what you deserve. You get what you're willing to negotiate and advocate for. And so I think being able to negotiate and advocate well, it might be the difference of whether or not you get that raise. And so, you have to practice it. and you may have to learn that skill. And that's one of the things that Brittany and I have really spent a lot of time teaching doctors about. We've got an upcoming masterclass that we're going to do that's going to give people some tips and some skills that can help them along that path. And that masterclass is totally free. We'll have to send you the link for that when it comes out. So, folks who are interested can definitely hear about that. I feel like I'm taking over. Brittany, go ahead.
No, Alicia, I love all that you said. And, to your point, Justin, I think that there is a mindset shift that is required with negotiation. And that's like the first, the first thing that we talk about in our program is how do you evaluate this to see a win-win? Because sometimes when we consider negotiation, we think that this is something that is going to induce some type of conflict and tension within the relationship. But no, it's actually about just understanding that your employer is going to benefit as much as you will from this negotiation. And so understanding how can you position this as a win-win? And then the second part that I think helps with that mindset to feel very confident in your approach is not only what Alicia's talking about with the practice, the tips and scripts. I love it because the way that Alicia articulates some things like, I wouldn't know. I don't know if I would say it just like that, but clearly it has worked, and we've seen it work with our clients who have gotten 15K plus in raises. What helps with the ask is the validation that you can look for other data points. You do your research to know that you're not asking for too much. You are asking for just enough, and here are the reasons why. So when you have the data to back up that ask, then it almost shifts your mindset to go into the negotiation a little bit more confidently and positioning yourself as a win-win.
One final thing I would add, I love the role play idea that Dr. Taylor mentioned, and using objective data you can latch onto. Totally, those are critical. I think the third leg of the stool that I found to be really helpful is the idea of visualization, which is where you basically trick your brain into making you a seasoned veteran in a certain thing that you have no experience in. And so, I love to use ChatGPT for all sorts of things, or whatever your AI bot of choice is. But you might consider, if somebody is getting ready to do some negotiating, like framing the conversation and saying, like, dear AI bot, how might I use the technique of visualization in order to optimize this opportunity? And really what that looks like is you sit alone in a dark room for 30 minutes, close your eyes, and picture yourself walking into that boardroom, and you're envisioning in great detail the way that you're feeling, the body language of your counterpart, the things that you're going to ask for, the way that you're communicating with confidence. You're basically building a movie in your head. You're watching this happen, and you're building it in such a way that you look awesome and that you're warmly received by the counterparty, and everything goes exactly how you would have hoped. Then you walk out and you feel like $1 million, and you do that 50 times. And our friends in the realm of neuroscience have deduced that whenever you then on Monday morning walk into your boss's office and have this conversation, your brain doesn't see this as the first time you've done it. It sees it as the 51st time you've done it. And it's kind of old hat at that point. And the way that you communicate and the effectiveness and the body language and the confidence of the 51st time is much better than it is on the first time. And anybody who doesn't believe me, go back to episode 1 of Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast and listen to that terrible version of me who is doing this for the first time. And perhaps the two of you, Doctors Taylor and Halford, can point to you. I don't know the first time you did a podcast, but it probably wasn't your best work ever. But then once you build those repetitions, you're communicating much more confidently. And as a result, you are communicated to with more respect and more likely to get what you want. So all these tools, if you're like, I'm at 0 right now, I don't even know where to begin with this. Role play with a friend or with an AI bot, get some objective data, MGMA, Sullivan-Cotter, Doximity, random crowdsourcing from your friends in the same specialty in your city, and then practice some visualization in order to build those mental muscles to be able to get closer to that outcome you're looking for.
Yeah.
I've never used and I've never used AI for visualization. So that's like the next level, Justin.
There's all kinds of fun, I think, applications that we're still learning about in real time. This is a beautiful time to be alive. As we're sort of rounding the last corner and bring things to a close, one of the topics you mentioned you wanted to discuss, and I think this is really interesting and important, and probably we should have started this earlier in the podcast, but we can maybe have another conversation about this, is talking about the load that female physicians carry in terms of expectations of career, family, and the balancing act, and all of the sort of challenges that creates. I mean, negotiation is part of it. If you're a female physician negotiating on your behalf, in the mind of some of your counterparts in that discussion is like, well, this woman's just going to want to have kids and go to point 0.6 as fast as possible. So do I really need to give her what she wants? I'm curious to hear, what is your experience in this conversation, and how are you helping physicians in your coaching program address them?
I think that Brittne probably has a unique perspective because she is the one on here that has kids. I don't have kids yet. But one of the things I wanted to add to this conversation is that, I do think that as female physicians, it is really interesting. It seems like we are launching our careers at attendings usually around the same time that we are trying to start a family or plan for a family. And it's like, how do you negotiate and balance those two things, right? Because they almost seem in conflict with each other, right? How do you start a family without sacrificing your career? How do you, go forth in your career with the ambition that you want without sacrificing your ability to then have a family? One of the things that I have done is frozen my eggs, and I've been pretty transparent about that. I've frozen my eggs twice. And thankfully, I did both. I did it both times when I was in training, once as a resident and once as a fellow. And I was really blessed in that my insurance, both times, covered a large portion of the cost. And so, one of the things that I talk about, whether it is getting student loans forgiven, whether it is learning how to travel hack and, travel for free and luxury, or whether it's freezing your eggs, is using other people's money to pay for some of the things that you want in life, and especially the things that are pretty expensive. And so when it comes to egg freezing, I definitely wanted to utilize other people's money, in this case, insurance, and some of the employee benefits that I had at the time. The first time I froze my eggs, I think I just had to pay my deductible and maybe like 15 or 20% of co-insurance. And so if someone is thinking about freezing their eggs and they're curious about costs, I think it may range, but for me, I think it was between $10,000 and $12,000 would have been the full cost. And of course, it was maybe $3,000, I think, is what I paid out of pocket the first time that I did it. The second time that I froze my eggs, I was living in California at the time, and I didn't pay anything out of pocket. And so at the time, people who were fellows or residents within the University of California system, so University of California and Los Angeles or San Francisco or what have you, they had actually renegotiated the contract, because it's a union out there, to include family planning benefits. And so they actually gave each trainee $30,000 that you could use for egg freezing, for IVF, for surrogacy, for adoption. And so, at that time, I utilized my employee benefits to be able to freeze my eggs. And so, for people who are listening and really thinking about how am I going to navigate both of those things, if you, want to have a family or considering having a family, definitely do what you feel is right for yourself and your family. But if you're on the fence about that, maybe just now is not the right time. Consider freezing your eggs and really look into seeing if your insurance may cover a cost. You might be surprised at what you find.
Yeah, Leisha, I'm grateful that you provide that experience and expertise, because that's not something that I initially thought. When I was considering, okay, when is the appropriate time to have a family, I was just hopeful that everything was going to occur naturally. And I'm grateful that it did. But when we are thinking about family planning, to your point, Justin, you mentioned, like, when we go to the negotiation table, some women might think, oh, well, should I ask for this because their employer, who might be a man, could potentially be a woman, but it is thinking, oh, well, in a couple of years, they're just going to go down to point 0.6. I would think that that's unfair for, even to consider. And I know that it's a consideration that our client actually had, that she was thinking about, okay, in the next year, I want to have another child. And so therefore I should not negotiate. one of the things is you want to still negotiate. You still want to advocate for yourself and feel empowered to advocate for yourself, even if you're going to decrease your time. But you don't know for certain that you will decrease your time. And it's not only about the time that you're spending at that job, but also the value that you bring. There was a study that was done in 2024 that showed that hospitalized patients actually had better outcomes when they were managed by a female physician. So whoever you are, you provide significant value. And when you're thinking about family planning, I think it's also imperative to look over what are some of the other benefits that they afford. So for our company, they afford some type of childcare benefit, so if our kid gets sick, they can't go to daycare, then they will cover the cost of either emergency daycare or an emergency babysitter. All of those things are very valuable. Will they give you some contribution to your HSA, your healthcare savings account? So that way, if you are spending additional expenses for the family planning, then you get some of your employer to subsidize these things. This is all part of the consideration to ensure financial and physician wellness, because the biggest threat to our wealth generation is burnout and us actually leaving the job. So, well, and also disability. We could talk about disability insurance on a whole nother podcast. But, to that point, it is really important that we see financial planning as one of those things for us to negotiate, to ensure that we're looking at the entire benefits package and articulating our value and not allowing the possibility of decreasing our time to make us reluctant to ask for what we desire. And also for men, like my husband did not get as much of a paternity leave as I got as a maternity leave. So I think that also is an area in which we could negotiate to ensure that fathers have appropriate time to bond and to support their family as well.
Would encourage any listeners to check out Wealth Minded MD, Dr. Taylor, Dr. Halford, the podcast they're doing over there. They treat these topics at much greater length. I'm really grateful to each of you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with the APM Success community.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, it's been a joy.
If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.